Welcome everyone to the Sustainable Lifestyles Leaders series. And today we have, it's my great pleasure, I'm Vanessa Timmer, the Executive Director of One Earth. And I've got the great pleasure of introducing Claire Neller, who's the head of RAP Asia Pacific, which is connected to RAP UK. She's responsible for working and helping deliver the UN Sustainable Development Goal 12.3, which is about halving global food loss and waste by 2030. And Claire is responsible for identifying opportunities, creating new linkages and partnerships, lasting partnerships with organizations in the countries, governments, partners. And Claire also designed RAP's support programs with those partners and across RAP's functions, and provides key account management and technical delivery for the campaigns. And maybe tell us a little bit about the food, clothing, and plastics campaigns. And maybe within that, tell us about what's something exciting that you're working on right now that might not be already in its final phases, but might be in development.
Sure. I mean, this is like such a luxury for me because I just love to talk about what RAP does. So the potted history is RAP was set up by the UK government in 2000 with one very specific job to do, which was to increase the UK's recycling rate from the 12% that it was at the time to something better than that. And I think it's fair to say that everyone who was involved at the beginning of that thought that RAP would maybe be around for like 2 or 3 years, maybe 5 years tops. And kind of here we are 20 plus years later, kind of still doing the work that needs to be done to create a resource efficient economy. And I guess thinking about it is quite interesting. So RAP generally doesn't often use the term sustainable lifestyles. We talk about resource efficiency or a circular economy, but everything that we do is to help people live more sustainable lifestyles, whether that's when we talk directly to people or whether we make other kinds of changes. And so I'll just spend a couple of minutes just talking about kind of how RAP works, because we have similar mechanisms across the whole kind of suite of sectors that we work in. So whether that's food, whether it's plastics, whether it's clothing. And I guess that the way that I would describe it is that there are kind of 3 pillars that we use to deliver the impact that we want to. So one of those is really around kind of policy and strategy and building the evidence base. So we do a lot of work with governments, whether they're national governments, whether they're regional or state governments, to really help both build the evidence base for policy and to create policy and strategy, or advise on policy and strategy that then creates what we would call a supportive policy context for other interventions to happen. And so that spans a whole range of different things. So it could be research to really build that evidence base. So RAP was really the first organization that ever published any research that said, you know what, food waste is kind of a big deal and we should probably be doing something about it. That was back in 2007, I want to say, maybe 5. And that was really the first time anyone had looked at how much food was being wasted from people's homes, how much food was being wasted across the whole supply chain, really kind of delving into the nuts and bolts of that. And then it ranges right through to actually kind of working with governments to help write kind of strategies. So for example, one of my favorite projects that I've done is working with the World Bank in Mexico to kind of help write the strategy for food loss and waste in that for the country, which just, really was looked across a whole range of different stakeholders, of different interventions, and so on and so forth, which was just really exciting. So that's kind of the first pillar. The second pillar is where we really engaged very deeply with businesses in a sector. So we call that mechanism a voluntary agreement. Other people call them public-private partnerships, frameworks for action. There's a whole host of different names for them, but it's essentially bringing organizations together along a whole supply chain to look at how you might implement systemic change across that sector. So for plastics, that's the Plastics Pact, which if you look at anything that comes out from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, you will see it's part of their kind of new plastics economy. And there are now plastics pacts all around the world, which are modeled off the version that WRAP developed in the UK. And it's really about bringing together a whole sector. So that is packaging manufacturers, it's packaging technologists and designers, it's the brands and the retailers, it's the local authorities who collect that material, and it's the reprocessors who are reprocessing that material. And it really looks at how do you make very big systemic changes across that whole sector to really shift the dial towards a more circular economy. And that's what it's very focused on. This is not just about recycling, it's about changing the way the whole system works. So are we reducing packaging where we don't need it? Are we looking at alternative materials? How are we incentivizing the inclusion of recycled content? All of those things. We recently, just this month, published a really big piece of research. It was somewhat overshadowed because a little skirmish had broken out on the same day as we launched the report, which was obviously, much more newsworthy. But I do highly recommend just go on the WRAP website and have a look at the research that we published this month on packaging and how we sell food with less packaging. It's really groundbreaking and just delved into a whole host of different areas, looking at what the retailers were doing. It talks about date labels. It looks at how people buy and store and consume food at home. It's a really fantastic piece of work. So that's the kind of second pillar. And then the third pillar is where we talk directly to people about how they can make changes in their lifestyles to live more sustainably, whether that's around food waste, so helping people to understand how much food they're wasting at home and what they can do about that, whether it's about encouraging people to take care of their clothes and keep them in use for longer, or whether it's about kind of how to recycle the plastic packaging and the other materials that they do have within their home. And that really takes a very strong kind of behavioral science basis. Everything that WRAP does is evidence driven. We always want to be able to say, here's why we're recommending these things. Here's what the evidence says. Here's the latest behavioral science that talks about how you might use green nudges or social norming or some of these, pretty scientific mechanisms to talk to people about human behavior and the way people engage with things like food, for example, which can be very emotive issues and very tied up in kind of cultural norms and familial norms. So it's a really interesting kind of intersection between, some pretty robust kind of academic and research literature and these much more kind of holistic and human kind of angles. So yeah, those are the kind of the three pillars that we work on. Something that I'm working on at the moment, which is really exciting for me, is a product stewardship scheme for clothing here in Australia. So the federal government in Australia put clothing on its priority materials list and awarded a grant to a consortium of which WRAP APAC is a member. It's led by the Australian Fashion Council. And essentially what we're here to do is figure out, okay, how do you bring the sector together in a product stewardship scheme to really shift the dial on how circular the clothing economy is in Australia. It's really complex. Like many Western countries, Australia manufactures about 4% of its own clothing. Everything else is imported. There's almost no infrastructure for even really collecting that unwanted clothing, let alone recycling it. There's a strong reuse sector, but still, a lot of that material going into landfill, and a lot of the material that is collected through the reuse sector being exported out of Australia as well. So, some really kind of big, chunky challenges. But on the flip side, some really enthusiastic businesses. So even the businesses that, you might as a layperson think, oh, well, Kmart's not going to be interested in that kind of thing. It's a different Kmart to the American Kmart, but a similar kind of business model, very affordable fashion. And, they're one of the kind of leading proponents they're kind of there at the table saying, yes, we can see that this is a really important thing to be doing, but we don't want to be the first mover. There's a very kind of strong kind of tall poppy syndrome here in Australia. And so having a scheme that kind of brings those businesses together to allow them to all act in that kind of pre-competitive collaborative space is something that is really exciting. We're still quite early stages. It's going to be about a year before that's kind of shovel ready. That's the thing that I'm working on right now that is really exciting to me.
Oh, that's so great, Claire. And actually that example of the Australian Fashion Council work and the work you're doing on the product stewardship scheme now in Australia on textiles, it's interesting because it sounds like it's combining those three pillars: the policy and strategy, the work with business, the people-oriented campaigns, the evidence base behind it. And I know from speaking from Canada that we've also picked up the campaigns on Love Food, Hate Waste, and even inspired by Love Your Clothes, and have a plastics pact now in Canada. So, I see how the work that WRAP's done is not only helping in the UK, but is being picked up elsewhere. So that's part of your way of working too, that's my experience of WRAP as well. Do you want to just speak a little bit to that, about how it's being picked up globally, these approaches and the campaigns that you've worked on?
Sure. I mean, WRAP has collaboration at its heart. That's the cornerstone of everything that we do. And WRAP was set up in the UK by the UK government and had a very UK remit. Around kind of 5 or 6 years ago, we'd done maybe 1 or 2 kind of European funded projects, but nothing really that major. And I was kind of looking at the work that we did, and I was thinking, I think there might be other countries that might be interested in some of these really cool projects that WRAP has developed. And so I was working in kind of business development at the time within WRAP, and I kind of just was like, well, why don't I just go and see if it works? And it built up just really surprisingly quickly. So Richard Swanell and I were kind of doing it a little bit under the radar for a year or two. And then our board said, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Like, we're going to invest in your team. We're going to designate some of our charitable reserves for you. We're going to give you a bunch of people, do this more, do it better, do, bigger and better, more countries. And so WRAP Global was kind of born out of that time. And we've really just gone from strength to strength since then, which speaks, I think, in part to 2 things. One is just the amazing work that WRAP does, and the team, the global team, and the rest of the WRAP teams, who just really are so committed to delivering this work. And we've had people doing insane things like flying to Singapore for 2 days to give a presentation to a minister, because he was like, this is the only time I can do, and I'm really interested in your work. And and writing a plastic strategy for Singapore off the back of that. But I think the other thing is, it really speaks to the partners that we work with in the countries that we work in. So WRAP is not an organization that has a big global footprint. The Asia Pacific office is our first office outside the UK, and it's just me right now. Like, we'll have more staff, but we're not at that kind of big global footprint, like, for example, WWF. Not that there's anything wrong with that approach, it's just that's just not our approach. And so the partners that we have worked with in the countries that we work in are just so important to the success of the projects and the programs that we do. You know, building those relationships with those partners that, you know, some of them, the team in Mexico, I've worked with them for, you know, for 5 years now, and just, they're my friends. Like, they came to my birthday party. You know, we just have such great relationships with them, and they're the absolute cornerstone of the delivery that we do in the other countries that we work in.
Yeah, that's so great. And I think so. I really see that as being such a strength of RAP, is that relationship building and passing things on to other country teams, and this multi-sectoral approach to something that's historically been seen as more about people's education. So the fact that you take a policy, a business lens, and you bring people together in campaigns where you support people to live sustainable lifestyles, not just ask them to get more information about it, and the results are clear that in a lot of the campaigns you've done with RAP, there's real movement in terms of the actual amount of wasted food that doesn't happen because of the campaigns, the recycling around textiles, or the circular system around textiles, the plastics work. These are real impacts on the ground that are based in that evidence base, but also that kind of multi-sectoral approach where you're not trying to do it just with people's education. That's part of it, but it's much bigger than that. It's a much more of a systems approach.
I mean, it's, you know, the example that I always use when I'm talking to people about this is to say it's much easier to give people cheese in a resealable pack than it is to ask them to wrap up their cheese in cling wrap once they've opened it, right? So the changes that you make to the products that you sell, the packaging that they come in, the retail environment that you purchase them in, are just as valid as when you talk directly to people. And it's not like, I would never say, oh, one is better than the other. You have to have both, right? So you have to help people understand, if they're going to buy new clothes, like, what fabrics should they be looking for? How do they find more durable clothing? But then at the same time, like, they also need to understand how to take care of their clothes better, how to keep them in use, like what to do with them when they're, you know, at the end of the life that they have with that first consumer. So it's two sides of the same coin, not one or the other. And you know, we've always taken that approach right from the beginning, that you've got to change the context in which people are operating, right? If you go to the grocery store in the UK, you will very, very rarely find buy one, get one free offers anymore. You'll find half price instead. So same financial outturn for the consumer, different approach to how you sell people food. So, you know, that's always the way that we've really thought about it, is that they're two sides of the same coin, not an either or.
And then Claire, I think also the way that you work is so interesting. What you're describing before, that you're so keen to take on challenges, you know, not afraid of failure, but also ready to try new things that are kind of on the cutting edge. And sometimes even starting them off the side of your desk because you have a hint or an instinct that it might be something that's worth pursuing, like bringing these campaigns to other countries. So in all of your experience in the previous work that you were doing and in these years at RAP, you know, what would be a piece of advice that you would have for those who are just starting out or starting to be interested in involving themselves in sustainable lifestyles?
I think I would say two things. The first is perfect is the enemy of done. Like, you are never going to have all of the data that you need. You're never going to have every single stakeholder on board. You're never going to have that perfect scope for the project. Just start. You know, it's so much easier to get people on board with a project that you've started, where you can point to something and say, look, this is what we're doing. So, you know, just start doing it, and things will snowball from there. That has always been the approach that I've taken. And I think the second thing is, just as I said before, like, don't be afraid to fail, because you will always learn something from that. You know, RAP sets itself very, very ambitious targets. We know when we're setting them that we're not going to we're not going to deliver all of them. If we did, we wouldn't be pushing ourselves hard enough and we wouldn't be aiming high enough. You know, if RAP met every single one of its KPIs, that to me would be a failure because we hadn't been pushing hard enough and setting the bar high enough. So, you know, it's okay to have 5 goals and achieve 3 of them, because the 2 that you didn't achieve will have taught you way more than the 3 that you did about how to do that better next time, how to tweak what you were doing, how to talk to different people, how to scope it slightly differently. You know, that it will teach you so much more than the successes that you get. So yeah, they're a little bit trite, but they're kind of, you know, they're like that for a reason, that there's truth in both of those kind of aphorisms, I guess.
Great. Thank you. This is Claire Neller, the head of RAP Asia Pacific.
So welcome to the Sustainable Lifestyle and Education Leader Series. I'm Carolina at Stockholm Environment Institute, and I'll be your host of the session. Today we have Markus Terho from Sitra with us. I would like to first start with the introduction of Markus. So Markus Terho and his team encourage everyone in Finland to make sustainable choices in their daily life and help companies that have developed sustainable consumer products and services to grow through experimentation. Markus has decades of valuable experience in sustainable development, both in creating strategies and visions and in implementing them in practice. He also has a master's degree in technology. So thank you, Markus, for coming to speak with the One Planet Network Sustainable Lifestyle and Education Program Contributor Cohort. Could you share with us Sitra's work in sustainable lifestyles, and what is something exciting that you are working on at Sitra right now? I believe you have already prepared the slides.
Yeah, I have a few slides on that. Hopefully you can now see the slides. So the Finnish Innovation Fund for the past 5 years has been working on ways to interact with citizens, with the idea that can everyone find their own way to build good life that is sustainable. And so far we've defined sustainability in relation to climate change, so that keeping to the 1.5 degree warming target. And this work has been relatively successful here in Finland. So the work has been noticed in other countries and by the EU Commission. And we've gotten kind of encouragement that, hey, maybe we could speed up similar work in other countries, that could we help and support that kind of stuff. And for that purpose, we've created a kind of peer learning global community around the work that we have initially done in Finland. But I think the value of this peer learning community is that anyone who joins, or any organization that joins that, are committed to the fact that when they use the originally in Finland made methods, whatever new they develop, they return it back to the community and help other teams that come after them to do the same work with the updated methods. And that community is called Shift 1.5. But the kind of main idea why to work on this area is that we believe that activating citizens actually drives and pushes forward what governments, municipalities, cities, companies, non-governmental organizations already do to combat climate change. So we can speed up the work if we get people activated and can show that this grassroots level change is actually happening, but it's not yet noticed. And many times we kind of have these conversations that, is this a systemic change, or why are you blaming the individual? We are not blaming the individual. We are trying to give tools and kind of positive suggestions what to do more of, what to change in terms of what you eat, how you live, how you move about, what type of products and services you buy. And combine the systemic changes, how energy is produced without carbon emissions, how heating, electricity, cooling, our transportation systems, city structures and planning and all of that happens. So those definitely need to take place, but they can be kind of complemented by everyday choices that people make. And they can give a surprisingly large global contribution in terms of driving down carbon emissions. Very shortly, kind of this timeline, what we've done. So we started end of 2016 with this project at Sitra, and first we interviewed experts and asked them a simple question that if you would be king or queen of Finland, we don't have one, but if you would be one, and you could order people to change their daily habits or everyday practices, what would be your 10 commandments be? And the 2 first commandments were always the same, but the 8 that followed were totally different to each other, depending on the expert. And then some experts couldn't think of even 10 things to command. So we thought that, if the experts cannot kind of, with the drop of a hat, give a list that you should do this, how can kind of a quote unquote, normal person know what changes in their everyday lives create a large, medium, or small impact reduction in terms of climate change? And then we just simply looked at as many things as possible to change, and how well would we be able to model the climate impact of that particular habit change. And we ended up by purpose kind of when we saw that we can do a lot, then okay, let's try and do 100, so that there's enough that you can build many unique combinations, so everyone can find their own way of building good life that is sustainable. And then we quickly realized that 100 suggestions is way too much, so no one will go through this kind of every day and find that what would be a suggestion for me. And then we thought that we need some kind of digital tool to kind of pinpoint those suggestions that work for you in your current moment in life. And that's where this idea of a machine came about, and then it evolved into a lifestyle test. And the original brief for the team that was building it was that with 5 questions, so that you could do it while you sit in a bus or a metro or somewhere. You could do it in 30 seconds. So, but we failed, and we now, first version had 24 questions. Now we have 27 questions because we had some user input that certain things should be asked. So now we have 27 questions, roughly 5 minutes you spend on that, and you get personalized suggestions what to change, and you can build now a plan based on that. So you can tick that I'm already doing this, these are things that I could consider to change, and then we can see how big the impact is per individual who uses. And then the language that we use is based on kind of trying to better understand what are things that actually are behind the decisions that Finns make. And the same model has been used by Vanessa and the team in Canada, and it will be replicated in the UK most likely next, and possibly Sweden. So how to kind of give people better understanding that what do I get if I change my habits? And that typically is something else than climate or environmental matters. So it can be kind of well-being, better health, saving of time, saving of money, doing something fun with others, being an example, things like that. So using that kind of language, we can talk to a much wider audience than if we would kind of go with the spearhead of climate and environmental matters. Then we speak to those who have already kind of made a decision that I want to do something because of climate. But that's unfortunately in Western societies, it varies a little bit, but it's kind of from 25% of the population to maybe 35%. So we are missing out quite many of the population if we just talk about climate. And we thought that good success with our digital tool would be that if we get 50,000 times someone uses the tool. And that happened very, very fast. And in 2 years' time, we had more than 1 million times someone had done the test. And today we are a little bit over 1.3 million times someone has taken time and looked at how can I change my daily habits and build good life for myself that is sustainable. So we've done more than 50 projects or experiments together with cities, municipalities, ministries, companies, non-governmental organizations, and private individuals in Finland. And out of those 50, we've then kind of distilled now 14 different methods that we think would help a change maker team in another country to do the work that we've done in kind of 4 years, that they could shorten that time frame down to maybe a year and have all that kind of content and guidance available to citizens in their particular country or region or city. And for that reason, we've then put all of these 14 ways of working and tools into kind of descriptions of how they can be used. And we call it a method book. And each of the teams can pick 1, 2, 3, or even 14 of them and use them as they feel kind of that would be suitable in their context. But the main idea there is that interface towards the citizens needs to be tailored so that it feels local and culturally relevant. So it can't be done centrally from Finland or from another country. So we have no idea how this kind of content should be presented to people in Turkey or to people in Portugal or Canada or elsewhere. So we need a local team who understands the context and can put it into good use. And for that reason, we've created this community of change. And we've been lucky enough that EU Commission has thought that, hey, this makes sense. And the first wave of scaling the impact happens now in 7 countries plus Finland in an EU project that will last 3.5 years. And the Commission is investing 5 million euros into tailoring of this content, and then we do an updated version of the digital tool that the citizens see and use. Maybe I'll skip. This is how our current tool looks like in Finland. So it's very simple web-based thing. Push a button, 20 questions appear, and they are questions that you can answer if you can read. We just had a trainee who's 14 years old, and she could do the test and get her personal suggestions. So anyone can do it. Then the second version that we've done, or the iteration in Finland, is this kind of good life planning tool that the end result gives you a menu where you can kind of tick it that these are things that I would like to change, and you can see what the climate impact of that is. And the kind of belief here is that good life, it actually is sustainable. And our national surveys that we've done 3 times now show that those people that live a sustainable lifestyle, they are actually more, what's the right English word? It's not happier, but they find their life more meaningful. And now there are people who study the fact that, is it so that you find your life meaningful and then you start to live in a sustainable manner? Or do you live first in a sustainable manner and that makes your life more meaningful? So that's really kind of interesting, that it's not a negative spiral where you give up and reduce and don't do bad things, but actually if you live in a sustainable manner, you feel better about your life. Very quickly, our kind of philosophy, it's on the left-hand side here. Everything that we do towards the citizens is kind of developed and planned in a way that we put a person or an individual in the center. And we try to make positive suggestions of what to do more of. And that's just because of our brain chemistry, that how societies evolve and how people evolve is around the fact that we want to do something that develops us as humans, or develops the society. And typically that's something that you kind of want to do more of. So it's hard to get people engaged if you say what not to do, but it's easier if you can put it in a way that, hey, these are positive things that you can do more of. Everything you can't do like that. So there are few areas where we have to say that you need to reduce, but we try to do this kind of positive frame. And then where you come across of this content, we try to put it into places where it would come from an organization or a person that you're already familiar with, so that we've studied where people spend their digital time and their physical time and try to work with those organizations so that this content would come from a place that you already trust. And then I talked about this kind of motivations to actually change your habits. So it can be something totally different than climate for most people. So how do we use that to our benefit and make the content appealing to the largest possible portion of the population? And then this kind of explorer mindset, it may be kind of weird. What does that mean? But what we're trying to say here is that it's not a one thing that you do. It's not black and white, but this is a journey that you have to kind of be on for it's a lifelong journey. So it's not something that do 3 things differently and then climate change solved. Okay, let's do something else. But it's something that you need to experience and explore your whole lifespan. And then the last one is we're trying to put together 2 pieces of kind of research-based approaches. One is kind of how latest behavior change models say that things should be pushed forward, and then this consumption-based carbon footprint, that these 2 come together. And our 14 methods are under these 4 headings that you can see in this, what we call a key for change, which is in the middle. And we have methods that help change maker teams to understand what does this 1.5 degree lifestyle look like. And those we've developed together with IGES and Aalto and others. So this is not work that Sitra does alone, but we've been lucky enough to find great partners like One Earth and IGES and others that have been contributing quite significantly to all of this content. Then the second area is that how to understand human behavior better. So there are methods for that. And once you know the context, understand how to change people's behavior and what makes them tick, then you can run these kind of actions to catalyze change. And there are kind of models how to engage with the business community, with non-governmental organizations, private citizens directly. And then last but not least is kind of storytelling, which mostly is kind of how do you provide digital content on social media to remind people of the fact that they can do things differently. And it's tied to things that kind of hashtags that people already use. It's not kind of sustainability driven tweets or whatever, but when people share things about Christmas, Easter, I don't know, birth of a baby, whatever is a kind of well-known and widely used hashtag, we piggyback on that, because from the 100 suggestions, we have something that always fits in a popular occasion in the world. So it's easy to direct then people with that one suggestion to 99 other things. I talked about the kind of the motivations. I would have liked to shown also the Canadian version, but I couldn't find it. So sorry about that, Vanessa. But when people typically think that, and businesses particularly, that you can only engage with sustainability in terms of a product or service if it's low price, and then it can be also sustainable, and then people will buy it. But when we look at what's behind the decisions that Finns make, and these were surprisingly similar in Canada, that it's actually not price, but it's something that is related to people you love. So creating joy to yourself, to your loved ones, living an independent life, you feel that you're in control, you're making decisions. Many Finns are surprisingly eager to do some small actions for the environment, meaning that they can pick up litter or they'll recycle. They consider that to be small. But understanding these things, you can then kind of write the suggestions for people in a way that it speaks to the widest possible audience. I'll maybe skip some of these. I promised to provide something new that we are doing. When we are looking at which countries are kind of the highest on the list of where we would like to expand the Shift 1.5 community next, We have so far looked at the consumption-based carbon footprint of an individual, and then an OECD index on how mature the country is. But we also wanted to gauge that how ready are people to change their behavior. And we've now experimented with a way that asking, I think it's now 8 questions in a national survey, we can predict the readiness to change of the population. And we've done this now in 3 countries, Germany, Portugal, and Finland. And we can, with this tool, we can easily see that would it be kind of a good thing to focus your activity on some smaller group in the population. I apologize for this. Sari's daughter, Sari is our expert on behavior change, and Sari's daughter said that, "Mom, your graphs look absolutely horrific. They are terrible." So this is our draft version of the tool, but the idea is that it will be open source, given to anyone who wants to use it, and particularly people who do these kind of national surveys. By adding 8 questions, you can gauge the readiness to change towards sustainable lifestyles very quickly, and then profile that, is it a male, female, age.
Hi, I'm Erickson from Sustainable Lifestyles and Education Program. And this is one of our guest speakers today here. We have Vimlendu from Swechha. He's actually a founder of Swechha, was founded in the year 2000. So 22 years old this year. I had a question about your organization. So what is something exciting that you are working on right now? Could be something in development that hasn't been out yet, but is there anything in particular?
Something very, very interesting that we're working on right now. When COVID happened, we all, of course, a lot of our work, as in 60 to 70% of Swechha's focus or Swechha's work has been with schools, with universities and high schools. And when COVID happened, schools were shut, and schools are still in a way working in the anxious mode. So, there's very little outside work or workshops or tours or exposure trips that they are organizing. So that's when, during COVID, we realized that we need to work on food and resilience and work on things where we don't need to go to a school necessarily. Schools need to really understand hands-on education, hands-on agriculture and things. In fact, interestingly, there was a big protest that was happening in India for almost 2 years, the farm protest, where there were thousands and thousands of farmers of our country who actually hit the streets of India and actually won that entire movement. By the way, they were able to force the government to repeal the laws, because the government had come up with new farm laws that were extremely exploitative of the farmers and the farming system in that sense. So that was the time, and there was COVID, there was schools that were shut, there was a need of sustainable hands-on education, and there was very important agriculture, or sustainable agriculture was integral. The food system was integral to sustainable lifestyle and education. So we set up a small thing. We bought a small piece of land as a foundation, the outskirts of Delhi. And since last year and a half now, we've been setting up a farm school. It's sort of a sustainability lab, you may say, where we're looking at, it's twofold. One is, of course, involving the local farmers. It's actually in a part of India, which is one of the poorest regions of India from a Human Development Index point of view. So we involve the local farmers and local women and boys and girls in our work. So for example, we have a compost collective of young women who actually who involve on composting or organic farming. So there's some bit of work that we're doing with the locals, and the other is the work that where we're bringing in schools, these rich schools to Delhi, to actually see our center or our lab. And what is this lab? This lab is everything that you think about sustainability that you've been taught in a theory class. This is where the practical happens. So you learn about beekeeping, or you read about how bees are extremely important for agriculture. You actually go and are able to go and touch a bee or play with a bee. Of course, bees bite, but bees don't bite too. So they're lovely, lovely beings. But at the same time, the importance, the value of a bee in a food chain, it needs to be taught. It's not part of our education system. We think of that almost as an insect. But imagine, as in the entire pollination process is based on that one little bee that flies from one flower, one petal to the other. And that is what actually is most critical for food generation. But that's not, that's not a drawing room conversation. We only know bees as some as dirty insects that sting. So there's beekeeping that happens. There's different kinds of composting, where hands-on composting, young people get engaged and do composting. There's mud houses. It doesn't even have an air con, and it's cool, and everything is made from the resource. We built different kinds of mud houses there as demo structures for young people to understand that concrete, when the market told you to build concrete, they made stupid out of you. You can still go back, revert to the mud houses, and they're cool, and they're cool both. They're cool and they're cool. And so that we're building a small little fruit forest there. So yeah, that's a very interesting project where we're working on designing small little things that you can do in your own balcony, in your own neighborhood, in your own city, and not from a theory point of view, but actually practicing that. Actually, we have these composting systems where you can just take care of your own kitchen waste and so on and so forth. So that's a very, very interesting project that we're working on. Apart from that, of course, we are organizing a very interesting river exposure journey next month, where we're taking a group of 40 young leaders to a village and camping in a village for 4 days to understand sustainable lifestyle in motion in a village. So, it's not a conference that teaches you a sustainable lifestyle. You don't need to watch a fancy video and inconvenient truth. You go to a village and you see that in practice, you see that in motion. So we'll actually be camping there for 4 days to understand sustainability, sustainable agriculture, their own water systems, their systems of making houses, everything. A lot of times what we also talk about in our curriculum work or otherwise is not everything that is new and modern is correct. There has been this notion that was built by the market about two things. The first world was one thing, that everything that first world does is right and good, and therefore should be copied and followed. That is incorrect. And the other is the fact that old was backward. Not necessarily. If you look at the most sustainable practices of our planet, they all came from indigenous people, or they came from our countryside, and still it's in motion, it's in practice. So rather than actually demeaning them, or rather than killing them, rather than actually invading those sustainable spaces with our modern McDonald's and our pizzas and our denims, we need to really look at, of course, they have a right, as I'm not saying that someone who lives in a village doesn't have a right to a pizza or a fast food or a car. But at the same time, it's very important for us to really learn some of those things and celebrate and promote. Why is it so that people from the villages are migrating from sustainable agriculture to coming to cities and working as taxi drivers and things? As in what I was telling Vanessa a couple of weeks ago, that one of the richest states of India, called Punjab, has the maximum number of migrants going to Canada, UK, and US. Here, and they are all what? The farmers, the food growers of our country. But when they go out of the country, they become, many of them, of course, are in great position, but majority of them end up taking, brown collar jobs, as taxi drivers and things. So we need to somewhere understand the linkage between indigenous knowledge, the challenges. How do we actually keep that alive? How do we bring practice to the center of this sustainable lifestyle and education debate? It cannot be an Earth Day essay competition. It's not about sustainable lifestyle and education cannot be assessed based on your intellectual capacity or ability on sustainability. It has to be your readability and your action on sustainability. And that is the only indicator of success of a good sustainable lifestyle education module or a system. And a lot of it comes from and in every society, not just in India. I'm sure, as you know, our grandmothers were better upcyclers, recyclers than us. As in every time we recycle, we put it on Instagram. They recycled, upcycled all their lives and did it with pride. It was part of their culture. It wasn't part of their course. So therefore, we will have to really work on a system, and that's what Swechha works on, that it cannot be a course material. It cannot be a 12-hour course. It cannot be an 8-hour course. It cannot be a grade 9 course. It has to be part of our culture, our lifestyle, because we see the impact around us already.
Yeah, I just want to mention for those listening in as well, that they can find more information on Swechha's website, which is swechha.in. So SWECHHA.in. You can find more information, also obviously more information about Swechha. So I have one question before we say thank you and move on to the Q&A, which is, what is like one piece of advice you would give young people or people in general starting out a career in sustainable lifestyles and education?
There's a lot of scope to do change, because anyone who wants to get into sustainable lifestyle and education, it doesn't have a fixed format. And I'm sitting in front of you, it's not as if I learned this from a school. It was something that I picked up as I said, every day is a new work, a new strategy, and there's a lot of scope. And it's so multidisciplinary. You can be a doctor, you can be a scientist, you can be an artist, you can be an academician, you can be a researcher, you can be anybody and still work on sustainable lifestyle and education. That's the beauty of this sector, that it's multi-sectoral. We need people who are great data scientists. We need great communicators. We need great researchers. We need great scientists, as I said. So I think irrespective of what your subject is in the university, what you're studying, sustainable lifestyle education is a very, very important space. And it's a space that will gain more traction because we don't have a planet B. And there's more and more people who understand the importance of sustainable lifestyle and education. More and more governments and people in power and businesses understand that sustainability or responsible business or responsibility and sustainability has to go together. Profiteering cannot be the only bottom line. And therefore, there's more also from a career point of view. If sustainability has to be a career, there are more and more companies that are turning green or are shifting towards or realizing that one of the indicators of success has to be their planet or their care for the planet. So it cannot, one is the policy or the rule of the law, rule of the land that tells them to behave, and the other is the shareholders, the stakeholders, the large consumers are bottom up asking them for more responsible businesses. So for example, in India, we have something called EPR, which means extended producers responsibility, which means that every time I get my chips in a plastic packet, it's the responsibility of the chips maker or the snack maker to take that plastic back, or make sure that you don't send a single-use plastic into my house. So a lot of it is growing, and that's where we will need better communication, better research, better design students. So my one line, as I've said 20 already, one line suggestion to all the young people would be that it's a very, very dynamic space, very interesting creative space, and it's an urgent space, as in, this is where you will see change. It is something which is the most urgent thing, as in building yet another, 200-story building in Manhattan. Maybe you want to be part of that project, that can stay, but saving that one tall river in India, that's going to be more gratifying. You will have purpose in life if you work on sustainable lifestyle education. Put your education, your purpose in better use if you work on sustainable lifestyle and education.
Yes, thank you. That's really inspiring to hear, and I'm sure our cohorts agree with me. So I just want to thank you so much, Vimlendu from Swechha, coming here today to speak in Sustainable Life as an Education program. It's really been super interesting and really inspiring, and I've learned a lot today, and I'm sure other people have as well. Yes, thank you.
So welcome everyone to the Sustainable Lifestyles Leaders series. Today, I'm Vanessa Timmer, and I'm the Executive Director of One Earth. And today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Bernard Combs, who's a program specialist at UNESCO. And he's the lead on coordinating the implementation of UNESCO's Education for Sustainable Development for 2030 priority actions on local level actions and accelerating those, and also in empowering and mobilizing youth to foster local networks and platforms for intergenerational multi-stakeholder collaboration, and linking that to community planning and decision-making processes. Bernard is also working to reinforce cooperation across other agencies, so with UNESCO and other agencies and stakeholders in communication, education, and public awareness in the areas of biodiversity, water, oceans, cities, and sustainable lifestyles. And so speaking of sustainable lifestyles and education, Bernard, welcome. And so maybe share with us a little bit about that story, about what you've been working on around
what we've
that.
been working on. So in terms of what UNESCO has been doing, last year we did a survey of curriculum of about 100 countries around the world to see how well in environmental issues were integrated, including sustainable consumption and production. The results were pretty bad, shall I say. Out of 100 countries, about only 50% reported or mentioned climate change. Only 1/5 mentioned biodiversity, and only about 6% mentioned sustainable consumption and production. So clearly, there's a lot more to be done if we want to make sure that sustainable consumption and production is integrated into education. We also carried out with Education International, which is basically the network of all the teacher trade unions around the world. We did a survey. About 60,000 teachers from 140 countries responded to the survey on the question, are you ready to teach environmental sustainability in your classroom? Okay, the immediate response was yes, we're ready, but either we haven't really been trained when we were at teacher training college on issues like sustainable consumption and production. We don't really have the tools, or we don't have time within our busy curriculum agenda to be able to do that. Or sometimes our principal in our school is not really into, the idea of kind of hands-on discussion about sustainability, circular economy, and those kind of things. So there again, clearly there's something that needs to be done. We need to make sure that sustainability and sustainable lifestyle, sustainable livelihood is part of teacher training curriculum, but also needs to be part of some of these master's degrees, bachelor's degrees that university are doing, so that young people like the cohort here today can actually be better trained or given the skills or the tools or the agility to be able to juggle with sustainability issues and sustainable lifestyles. At UNESCO, the one thing that we have to remember about UNESCO is that we're not only education. UNESCO is also natural sciences, social sciences, communication, and culture. And as such, we look at lifestyles from all these different angles. And it means that we try to introduce them in a variety of programs, which include, for example, we have a platform on cities, and in seeing how do you talk about lifestyles, sustainable lifestyles in the urban context, which means looking at the issues of climate, the issues of mobility, the issues of urban space. In terms of culture, we, of course, everybody knows that UNESCO is the World Heritage. It's often the first thing people say, oh, you work for World Heritage. No. But within heritage, there's something called intangible cultural heritage, i.e. living heritage. These ways of doing things that different communities carry out, which many of them are linked to lifestyles and ways of adapting to climate, to natural risk and others. We also work on oceans. We have a program called Ocean Literacy, which is not just about the facts and figures on oceans, but it's also about everything surrounding the ocean, the jobs linked to the ocean, the ways of engaging citizens on terms of the ocean. We also, one of the projects we've been very involved with is called the UNESCO Green Citizens Platform, something that we launched just before COP15 in Paris to basically showcase people doing sustainability, not just talking about it, actually doing it on the ground. And there are plenty of examples of sustainable lifestyles and what alternative sustainable lifestyles should be in that. We've also carried out a campaign for the last 2 years called UNESCO Trash Act campaign, focusing on waste recycling with schools, with communities around the world. And there again, we have great examples of people concretely doing things, while including things like building your school materials. Oh, great, you found it out of plastic bottles, or paying for your school canteen by bringing back things that need to be recycled because the school has a kind of a contract with a recycling company and that pays for your school meal, and plenty of other exciting things. It's also a way to give ideas to people on what can you do. So that's another inspiration that we are working on. I'm just trying to think what. Oh yes, we also last year, because we had our World Conference on education for sustainable development, we launched a campaign called Learn for Our Planet and asked people to send in videos on, why should we learn about sustainability? And there again, plenty of very exciting, motivational types of things. We also are, yes, there we go. That one you can just leave up there, because it's also part of my message. Basically, we have to tackle lifestyles, consumption, productions from all possible angles. We have to be creative about it. We have to call in, from different perspectives. It's not always easy to do some of these projects because we as a UN organization, we are basically our bosses, our countries. So it's not always easy to explain to ministers of education why somewhere in the school program, educational program, there should be something about lifestyles. It's because too many education systems are still very focused on you have to get good grades to move on to the next level, rather than focusing on you need to provide skills and knowledge for people to be able to adjust to this very complex and constantly changing world we are in, and to be able to adjust to quickly changing situation. As COVID showed us that those who were quick to adjust to digital and online learning were able to keep kids, I won't say, well, quote unquote, in schools or in learning, compared to those who were not and got a bit lost along the way. That's kind of a very quick
That sounds good, Bernard. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back to the beginning just so we can show the slides that you had brought for them, just to quickly look at them. And then I'd love to ask you and the next question. So we'll just kind of reflect on each of these slides. So this is the target that you were mentioning. Go ahead.
So that's the target I was mentioning, where you see sustainable lifestyles right there, and linking the issues of human rights and gender and culture. And culture should not be taken as as movies and theaters and museums. The culture is also who we are and who we are as communities.
Great.
And then what else? Yeah, yes. So we had this World Conference with the Berlin Declaration, which covered quite a few things, as you can see from this infographic. With one of the key elements was making environmental and climate action core elements, and especially encouraging environment and education ministries or organizations to work together and move things forward. And then you had, yes, those are the covers of this youth exchange series. Green skills, climate and biodiversity. The next one is the thing about how badly biodiversity, climate and sustainable consumption are reflected in national curriculums. And then you should have, the next one should be teachers, I believe, yes. So the teachers. And I think there was the next slide is about, there we go. How teacher feelings about readiness. So sustainable consumption, not ready 31%, moderately ready 31%, very ready 39%. It's not too bad, but there's that 31% of not ready that needs fixing, shall we say. Yes, and also the other thing I forgot to mention was that for us, Education for Sustainable Development basically is there to help achieve all 17 of the SDGs. So we developed this guidance material, taking every single one of the 17 SDGs and going and listing learning objective for each of them. So next page, you should have something about SDG 12. No, I guess I didn't put it in. So for SDG 12, we've got a number of things. And then to complement that, we developed this web platform of resources for educators on every single SDG with resources for early childhood, primary, secondary, and then ideas for doing things in your classroom. And you should have the intro part for SDG 12. And we're currently starting to update, revise it, because unfortunately web links often die out after a few years. So you have to go back and or discover new materials, because that's something that's also coming out. I've talked about the green citizens. And the next slide is highlight some. So among green citizens, you have, of course, influencers, but then you also have these ideas of citizen-led actions. So if you go on the website, you can find a lot of things. And then, oh yeah, next one, yes. I talked about this, intangible cultural, which is living heritage. If you click on the next slide, you can find that there is something about SDG 12. And for instance, you have something about promoting traditional foods and safeguarding traditional foodways in Kenya. An example of something that's part of this, this living heritage. I encourage you to go looking into that, but warning, you can spend the whole day looking at all these things. And then let's see. Yes, I talked about ocean literacy, trash hack. Yes, we mentioned that. The learn. Yes. And basically our key message is we have to learn and act for our planet and for people right now. and basically stop the blah blah and go and do things.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So inspiring. We'll add the links for those different campaigns into the chat. And Bernard, if you have, maybe share with us one thing that's really exciting to you right now that you're working on.
Right now, well, I'm working on a number of things related to basically nature education. How do you inspire, engage people to take on more actions towards nature? So I'm working with WWF, with IUCN on how can we get basically the general public to care and do it on a daily basis rather than just when there's a big campaign for, around World Environment Day or World Biodiversity Day. So there it's to link, because there are plenty of things out there. There's been plenty of campaigns. It's to try and find the little elements that will get people to move, and in particular at the local level. And for that, I'm working with basically a cluster of, within UNESCO, there are a network of cities attached to UNESCO, and one of those is called the Learning Cities, where city governments offer opportunities for learning on all kinds of things in all kinds of settings within the city. So to link that with green spaces and local agriculture, local urban agriculture. So that's my very exciting, challenging thing.
And it connects very much to what you, of course, your passions that when you got started in vets and parks, the work you do with Scouts. So yeah, and connecting it to daily life. And Bernard, is there one piece of advice you would have for people who are just getting started?
Yeah, I would say be ready to be flexible, be ready to think out of the box, as nothing is a straight path. Even if, usually people say the quickest way to get from one point to another is the straight line. Actually, for a career path, it doesn't work. You need to be able to kind of navigate. And you also need to kind of have an open mind to thinking, okay, this is my passion. How do I get there? It sometimes means that you have to do other things before you get to that point. Like for me, for 2 years, I was basically a bilingual technical writer on computer manuals for basically adapting computers coming from the US to the European situation. And true, it wasn't my passion, but actually it helped me develop the skills, the technical skills, both the bilingual one, but also being precise in writing documents that I could then use on more exciting stuff. So yeah, be flexible, try things, you need to try, you need to, and then it's the same thing with food, sometimes you go, oh no, I don't like this, try it. You might like it. If you do, good. If not, you move on to something else. I think that's the thing. And I would say to add to it, basically also look for potential volunteer opportunities, because that can also open up possibilities. For instance, being in the SCORE to help report about what everybody is doing on sustainable lifestyles and education. It's one way to see, because that way you can, by being a volunteer, you can test if it's really something you like to do, and you can figure out what are the skills that you like and will get you further. So that's my piece of advice.
Thank you so much. So Bernard Combs from UNESCO, thank you so much for sharing your career path and the work UNESCO is doing that's so inspiring around sustainable lifestyles and education.
Thank you. Yes. Welcome to the Sustainable Lifestyles and Education's Leaders Series. I'm Carolina, the Comms Officer at Stockholm Environment Institute, and I'll be your host for the session. Today, we have Atsushi Watabe from the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies with us, also known as IGES, and I would like to kick off the session with a brief introduction of Atsushi. Atsushi Watabe is a Program Director of the Sustainable Consumption and Production area at IGES. He has a strong background in the sociology of rural development, population movement, and migration in the Southeast Asian countries. He is also experienced in monitoring and evaluating environmental policies in developing countries, particularly on climate policies. He has been engaged in the Sustainable Lifestyles and Education program from the start of 2012, and is also involved in the policy design and evaluation to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns in Asian region. So could you kindly share with us, I just work on sustainable lifestyles. What is something exciting that you are currently working on at IGES at the moment?
So IGES has been collaborating with SEI and One Earth for years to run the Sustainable Lifestyles and Education program. And under this program, we have supported more than 20 projects in cities and villages, or some of them are country level. And based for these projects, the project implementers and community members try to identify the specific issues of sustainability or sustainable living in their unique contexts. Some of them concern the energy issues, some of them are more food-related issues, some of them are more education focused. But anyway, based on these ideas, we have worked with the cities, communities, non-governmental organizations, or sometimes government institutes to conduct many activities to, in short, to create the context where people can identify the opportunities for changing their living contexts so that they can improve their living, they can have more resilient life with fewer carbon footprint and resource footprint. So this is one of the project led by Kenneth Ochoa, who I believe you also have the chance to talk to him. And he and his team of university worked with many youth in Colombian cities, where the young members of the people conducted a study to identify the issues of food, transportation, energy, waste, and many urban living issues, and then proposed solutions together with these students and citizens, and carried out physical as well as online campaigns to shape sustainable lifestyle to the urban residents of Colombia. And another project is the one in Armenia. In this project, a few universities in the capital region have collaborated with the rural villages to renovate their irrigation systems with solar energy so that the students and farmers can co-create their sustainable low-carbon food supply chains and also support the living conditions of the rural farmers. So this is quite effective as the learning opportunities for students and also for the farmers. They have gained experiences in developing low carbon, sustainable and food supply chain together with the experts and the students, and also to market their products to the urban areas or even foreign countries. So these types of cross-cutting collaboration among people with different backgrounds are quite effective in creating the context as well as the capacities for living sustainably. So these are one of the main activities we have collaborated. And the other one is so-called Global Search for Sustainable Schools, in which we collaborated with more than 80 schools globally to work with teachers, students, and neighboring communities to shape the school curriculum, school management, and community activities for the sake of the sustainable living at the local context. And unfortunately, during the period of implementing these projects, we have had a COVID pandemic, and many schools have closed, and the community activities have been stopped for a while. But this experience also gave them the opportunity to reconsider what kind of social context or what kind of technologies or knowledge they need to have to live sustainably in the rural these contexts. And finally, another I want to introduce another project called 1.5 degree lifestyles. Under this, we have collaborated with many cities globally. Some of them are in Japan, some of them are in Brazil, Thailand, India, or South Africa. Anyway, we worked with the cities and researchers, practitioners in these countries so that we can identify the current carbon footprint of the average citizens living in these countries. And this is one example from Japan. And then set a target of reducing this carbon footprint and discussed with the local people what kind of actions they can take to reduce their carbon footprint. This is just one example from Japan by way of, for example, commuting by train instead of a private vehicle or commuting by bicycle. They can reduce some of the carbon footprint. Apologies for skipping some of the slides, but anyway, after this discussion, we have worked with the citizens to test some of these low carbon behaviors in their home or households, and then brought in their results. But what is interesting to us through these discussion and experiments was, so for example, this is one case from a city in Japan about the low carbon behavior in moving. And the darker blue color means that many people have actually tried some of these low carbon options, like using lighter vehicles or reducing their travel mileages to reduce carbon footprint. But as you can see from these graphs, many of the participants of the household experiments say they wanted to try these low carbon options, but they couldn't because of many reasons like the cost or their lack of knowledge or their rules in their workplaces or rules in the neighborhood communities or their families' needs and so on. So we think that it's quite important to understand these different needs that may enable or make it difficult for people to take sustainable behaviors. And with this in mind, we can start working with the local governments or local business or local civil society organizations to consider one step further by not asking people individually to change their behavior, but to collaborate with some of the local organizations to shape different contexts of working, for example, or context of moving, so that they can find different needs and different opportunities about the ways they move or they refrain from moving. Well, these are some of the actions IGES is currently working on. And we want to expand our collaboration with the local governments or local business providers so that we can further work for sustainable lifestyles and decarbonized lifestyles work together with them.
On the ground in the global south and also the 1.5 degree lifestyles project on individual lifestyle action at city level. Thank you really for emphasizing the importance of bigger environment in order to enable sustainable lifestyles adoption. Our last question is that what would be the one piece of advice from you for people who are about to embark on a career journey in the field of sustainable lifestyles?
Well, based on my background and based on my experience in working for sustainable lifestyles work in IGES as well, I have one or probably 2 points which I always keep in mind whenever I speak up or whenever I write about sustainable lifestyles. Well, the first one is I always try to use plural, no, sustainable lifestyles instead of sustainable lifestyle. Because what is important and what is interesting to me is that the way people from different backgrounds, different needs shape their own understanding and their own actions for sustainable ways of living instead of applying a single sustainable lifestyle, which is determined either by the government policy or by the science. So I always try to refrain from writing the sustainable lifestyle, but instead try to use sustainable lifestyles and sustainable ways of living. So that's the first point. And the second point is, well, I try to refrain from understanding sustainable lifestyle as their goal or their status, but instead I try to consider the process of learning and understanding and acting are much more important about sustainable lifestyles. So, well, in many cases, I have seen myself in the Sustainable Lifestyles project under the OPN program or my study in Thailand or in Fukushima. People often changed and reconsidered their understanding about what is their ideal way of living they want to have, what they want to change, what they want to keep for themselves or for their kids or their grandsons and granddaughters. So I understand the sustainable lifestyles and their interpretation of sustainable lifestyles can change dynamically. And we always need to keep these in mind. So these are my understanding and what I keep in mind myself. But I don't want their cohort members to follow what I said now, because just as my personal background and experience brought me to think about these 2 points about sustainable lifestyle, I believe the cohort members have unique backgrounds and experience, either in their universities or in their organizations or in their personal living. And all of these personal experience and studies will help you bring in new ideas about sustainable lifestyles in the discussion or discourse or practices of the policymakers, researchers.
Hello, welcome to the Sustainable Lifestyles and Education Leader Series. My name is Laura Suyo Mesias, and I work for the Sustainable Lifestyles and Education team of the United Nations Environment Program. I'll be your host for this session. Today, we're talking to Laura Hunter, the Creative Director of Futerra, a London-based change agency. They create campaigns that foster sustainable development. They've never knowingly accepted a client brief, funding, or partnership that has not served social justice or environmental protection. I want to thank Laura for joining us and sharing with the One Planet Network Sustainable Lifestyles and Education Program contributor cohort so that they can learn from her experience in the sustainability field.
So Futerra, just to give you some context, has been around for about 22 years, maybe more, maybe up to 25 years now. And Futerra has always been thinking about, since its inception, how do we get millions of people engaged, excited, motivated around sustainability? So that whole, so that I think that's been a central tenet of Futerra's work. But kind of more recently, that became more pertinent with the work that we've done on the Good Life goals. I'm not sure if you're all aware. So how do you take these big goals, the sustainable development goals that are essentially a blueprint for a better future? How do you take those and make them accessible to people from all walks of life? So actually, how can we, through our lives as people who are parts of communities, how can we play a role in accelerating that big meta agenda of the sustainable development goals? So yeah, long answer, but I would say sustainable lifestyles has been a kind of central tenet of Futerra's work throughout the years.
Okay, and now we turn to Futerra specifically, and I just we'll let you go on and share us your presentation on your work and what you're doing currently on sustainable lifestyles, and maybe just clear up on the Good Life goals. It's sort of similar to the Anatomy of Action in terms that they lead on from the Sustainable Development Goals, and they have turned it into specific actions that people can do. You can just check it out. They did it as well with UNEP Sustainable Lifestyles team a couple of years ago. Yeah. So go ahead, Laura.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my slides. Just bear with me. Okay, can you see that, Laura? Yeah, you got it?
All good.
Okay, great. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background of Futerra and kind of what makes it different and what we do. So Futerra is mission first, mission owned, and mission led. Mission with a business rather than a business with a mission. And we were one of the UK's first certified B Corps, a member of UN Global Compact, and some other initiatives as well. So what is our mission? It's Anthropocene awesome. That is why we come to work every day. It's what we hold ourselves to. It's what drives us, and it's what we try to steer our clients towards. So the Anthropocene, a word you may have heard, that it's essentially our new geological era. It's the era that we're living through. Kind of also known as the age of humans. So that we mean it's not just less bad or marginally better, but radically transformed. And our mission, to make the Anthropocene awesome, we cannot, as one, relative small agency, ever begin to achieve that alone. So our mission is really an invitation. And what we want to do is we hope it inspires people, whether that's our partners, our towards awesome, not just to make the world a little bit less bad. We want to radically transform it. And can we make the Anthropocene, which, the geological era that we're living through today, can we make that amazing? Because here, so we have actually we're kind of represented in Europe, but also North America and Mexico City. We have clients all over the world from, as you can see on the doc. And Futerra is an interesting organization, I would say. It's made up of essentially 3 enterprises that you see here and a non-profit. So we're organized into these enterprises and an independent charity, all offering ways to fulfill the mission. So the change agency is kind of what I've been talking a little bit about today. We advise many different businesses and brands on sustainability. Futerra Makes, which is a product incubator. We have Futerra Academy, which is a training and development arm of Futerra, and also the Solutions Union, which is our non-profit endeavour. I think what's interesting in all the enterprises in our charity, what really Futerra has it's a philosophy of what it takes to make change. So everything that we do is always rooted in and combined with logic and magic. And by logic, what we mean is the technical sustainability, grounded in science and evidence. And then the magic is how you really, that's really about communications, how you bring people with you. And really what we do is bring both of those things together. So you have robust magic, the compelling, the excitement, the buzz, the soul that makes people want to join with us. And everything we do is kind of geared around the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are some of our clients, friends and partners. So we work with some of the most exciting organizations in the world, from Google to Netflix to Tommy Hilfiger, WWF, and many more that you can, to have this all over the world towards that mission that I mentioned. So what I'll do now is just share with you some examples of the work that we've done in the sustainable lifestyle, good life goals, which I've mentioned already. So as I said, we worked with many different partners, the government of Stockholm, Japan, SEI and the UN, to across the world, make a credible impact towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So we turned the SDGs, which I mentioned, the blueprint for a better future, and humanity to the good life goals, which you can see here. So really, so how can people make a difference? So, good life, the SDG 1 becomes help end poverty rather than zero, I mentioned before. I think really speaks to this. So turning, the SDGs into something that was universal, like using this emoji language to help people engage with those issues. The next project I wanted to talk about was something that we actually ran through the Solutions Union, which is called Everyday Climate Heroes. So during COP26, which we had in the UK, in Scotland, we saw this as an amazing opportunity to engage the British public on climate action and how they action. And what we found was that in the UK context, people saw climate activists or climate action as not, they just saw people talking about climate action as politicians, scientists, traditional activists. They didn't see themselves in the story of climate action. So what we did was work with a world-renowned photographer, celebrity photographer in the UK and in the US as well, to take portraits of what we called everyday climate heroes. So we found 10 people who came from all walks of life in their communities, were making a real impact on climate action, but had never received the headlines or the limelight. And we put them on billboards all across the UK. Here's an example of one of our clients, coal miner formerly, and now he was volunteering on renewable energy schemes in his community. So telling a new story about what climate action. It had lots and lots of press coverage in the UK. So we highlighted, on the right there, a man who was helping to build low energy homes. The two people on the left there had set up cycling schemes in their communities. One was learn and grow their food. And then we took that on an exhibition to tell these stories in the heart of central London, and this exhibition's now just moved to another part of the country. So we're really people on what climate action looks like, and that essentially allowing people to see themselves in that story. The next project I wanted to share with you is something that we did through side of enterprise of Futerra, and what we did here was actually something really interesting. So people, people love the world, but how do you, obviously, how can you create a sustainable pet food or cat food either? So what we did was bring together sustainability experts. We worked with Mars Pet Care to create a delicious, nutritious, insect-based cat food, which had a much smaller, what we call environmental paw print. So this was the UK's first that we developed in partnership with Mars. And here are some of the branding. So Mars developed the product, Mars Pet Care, so we developed the product, and Futerra developed all the branding, the messaging of that, of sustainable product into people's hands. And then the penultimate project I wanted to share with you, again around sustainable lifestyles a little bit, was looking at crime. Is a really awful, devastating problem, but there's a real lack of awareness around it. So what we wanted to do was raise the profile. So to raise the profile of international wildlife crime, what we knew we had to make it personal to people, because wildlife crime could seem quite distant and irrelevant and nothing to do with your life. This beautiful campaign to essentially help people to connect wildlife crime with people. So using the platforms of others, we developed a campaign that allowed the public to find out what their kindred species was, so that they could connect with the animals and the wildlife, that were endangered. About is around sustainable lifestyles. It's planet placement. So this was a fascinating project that we did with BAFTA, which is the British Academy of Film and TV Arts, Albert, to create planet placement. So this is looking at how can we enable sustainable lifestyles through film. The mediums of film was work with writers, script producers, many other creatives working in the TV and film industry to find out ways that we could show sustainable lifestyle, really looking at the power of content and storytelling to raise, to raise the issues of climate and other environmental issues, but crucially sustainable lifestyle actions can we get into programming so that we can really normalize sustainable lifestyles through culture. So those are my, that's kind of the, and some of the work that we've been doing and are doing in this space.
Thank you very much.
Stop now. I'll stop sharing now.
I don't know if maybe you want to share something you're doing right now that you think it's interesting, or are they all protected by confidentiality?
Yeah, it's really hard to show work in progress. I'm so sorry. I would say the Everyday Climate Heroes is in progress, so we're now taking that to Liverpool. But yeah, there are I'm work in progress. But hopefully that gives you a taster of what we've been up to over the last over the recent.
I want to ask you about the advertising industry. Well, of course, you are kind of the odd ones out. That kind of disruptive interventions have changed the industry in a great manner of ways, and I wanted you to tell us a little bit, how has the ad agency changed, and how do you think the ad industry changed?
Really great question. So I think that the advertising industry is now beginning to reckon with what its impact is. So the advertising industry is the maker of manners, I would say. So the advertising has a real climate impact. So the ad industry's carbon footprint is relatively minimal, but the impact of its work is exponential. Kind of banging the drum on for the past 5 years is that the advertising industry must take accountability for its actions. And we're now starting to recognise the role of advertising in proliferating, glorifying, making desirable, unsustainable behaviours. So that conversation is I think in the worst instances, you have advertising agencies doing the work for fossil fuel and oil companies. But it's not just about that, it's also about the unsustainable. The industry collectively is now starting or beginning to have that conversation where they start reckoning with their impact. And I would expect that you will see much more pressure on the advertising industry around this. In Rebellion, the climate activists wrote an open letter to the advertising industry, calling out its role in proliferating the climate crisis and nature crisis, and which was really great to see. And that's kind of given the advertising industry a little bit of a kickstart in terms of reckoning with its impact. But yeah, you will expect to see in the future that this conversation accelerates.
And then
hugely.
I wanted to turn to climate activism and in general trying to push these goals. They're very important and they're very serious, but I like how Futerra takes it and talks about it being awesome. In general, it's not something that we associate when we talk about climate change and doing something about it. So why do you think it's important to think this problem from a regional perspective, and instead of all, because we do know all about the academic stuff, but I do feel that one point in which we fail is in trying to make it attractive.
Yeah.
Not just something.
I think you're right, and I'm glad that you've kind of grabbed hold of that about Futerra, because I think that is what makes us different in the communication space around these issues. So I could talk about this for hours, so I'm going to try to limit my answer. But what is as a group of people on this call and many others like us, we care deeply about these issues. These are the issues that get us out of bed in the morning. It's the issues that we kind of want to work on, campaign on. So we hold as environmentalists or social environmental justice advocates, which I'm assuming everyone on this call is, we care, like we really care about these issues so much. but not everyone does, and not everyone is there yet. So it's very difficult to have an academic conversation or a solely academic conversation in order to change someone's behavior. Rationality is important, of course, but it's not that great at winning people over. So we always believe in the magic, the storytelling, how you make this desirable, attractive to as many people as possible is really, really important. And that's because you've got to meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. So that's why we always come at climate and other sustainability communications with empathy. And we think that we will get there much faster if you are presenting solutions to a better future, if you're presenting the solutions in a really compelling way that gets people excited in a way that is desirable, attractive, exciting, fun. If you can do that from a behavior change point of view, you will have much more impact than if you're just talking about the academic, rational arguments for climate action or any other sustainable lifestyle action.
Yeah, I was actually hearing an activist a couple of days ago talking about radical imagination.
Yeah.
It's talking about thinking it not only as how, because that is something that defines us as humans, that kind of turns the thing that what makes us different is that we can actually imagine the future and build it before it even happens, and imagine it even though it's beyond our means right now. So how it should be shifted from a probably negative point of view to a more positive one. So I wanted to turn to, I read one of your last reports, which is super interesting. I would recommend all of you to read it. That is called Sell the Sizzle. So if you could tell us a little bit about what you found out on that report, which is super interesting in terms of how we should be communicating sustainability.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I also saw the note on radical imagination. Just to talk on that first, it's really a lovely thing that if you want to, and we always come at it at Futerra, that if you want to change the world, you've first got to imagine a better one. It starts with your imagination, with your vision, with what the world can look like. So yeah, completely agreed there. So on Sell the Sizzle, that was based on research around climate communications and understanding what, so we did a big piece of analysis of climate communications and looking at how do people respond to different messages, and messages of threat can often, what we found, can often just make people switch off, or they can make people turn away because it's too much to bear, it's too much to take on. So if you are, I don't know, it can just be, it can either be polarizing, can make people turn off. So going back to that imagination thing, what we found was a formula essentially for climate communications was called Sell the Sizzle, which we called vision, choice, plan, action. So Sell the Sizzle, I should say, comes from an old advertising adage, which is you don't sell the sausage, you sell the sizzle. So as advertisers, you're not selling just the product, which is like, I mean, a sausage is like meat all ground up, often with like some not too wonderful ingredients. An advertiser isn't selling that sausage, they are selling the thought of the sausage cooking, the sizzle, the experience. So that's where the saying comes from. So Sell the Sizzle, as I said, is vision, choice, plan, action. So start with the vision, start with what the world could look like, then go into the choice. What's our, okay, if you want, we could either have that beautiful vision or we could have this awful apocalypse. Which one is it going to be? Plan, what's our roadmap to the vision, and then action, which is your call to action. What do you want people to do? So that formula of vision, choice, plan, action, which crucially starts with like what's the beautiful possibility that we could have, is the most effective in terms of climate communication.
And then I wanted to ask you if you could give all of our cohort some advice in terms of how to move forward in a career in sustainability.
Ooh, that's a great question. I think you guys are a really amazing time through a career in sustainability, because the whole world, I feel, is now beginning to wake up. So we could be at this point where, you know, you've got the world's biggest businesses, amazing charitable organizations, amazing non-profits, incredible change makers, all wanting to put their businesses and organizations in service to that better world. So the first thing I would say is, what a brilliant time to be starting a career in sustainability. And I think that my advice would be, do what brings you joy. So figure out so there's this amazing Venn diagram that you may have seen. So think about what's your superpower? What do you as an individual? Everyone is so unique. And we all might have different superpowers. So someone might be really great at graphic design. There might be someone on this call who's a brilliant, I don't know, more into the science. There might be someone who's great on social media. So think about what your unique skills are as a starting point. Then think about, okay, what's the next circle is, what's the job to be done? So what are the issues that need working on? So, you know, climate justice, sustainable lifestyles. But then think about what brings you joy, what kind of gets you out of bed in the morning. Don't ever neglect your joy as well, because otherwise you'll lead to burnout. So think about your unique superpowers, and then find out a problem that you can help solve it. That would be my advice.
Well, I want to thank you very much. I really enjoyed this. I hadn't done an interview in a long time. I actually studied journalism, so you're kind of taking me back a couple of years ago. So thank you very much. And
thank you. That was a great interview. Thank you for being a very kind interviewer.
This was our interview with Laura Hunter from Futerra. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you with us today. We hope to see you again in another session of the Sustainable Lifestyles and Education Leader Series. Goodbye.
So welcome everyone. My name is Vanessa Timmer. I'm the Executive Director of One Earth. And today I am very pleased to have Markus Carson from the Stockholm Environment Institute. He is the Senior Research Fellow and he leads the Arctic Resilience Assessment and has also been leading up the Sustainable Lifestyles part of Stockholm Environment Institute's work. He's part of the coordinating desk for the One Planet Network Sustainable Lifestyles and Education program. Markus has worked on issues linking science, policy, and practice for some 35 years, and he's been in very diverse roles from advocate to practitioner, policymaker, teacher, researcher. He's very interested in how people through organizations, institutions, and institutions organize and respond to pressing social and environmental problems. And he's worked on issues from health to integration to climate change, Arctic change. His background is in psychology and he earned his PhD in sociology from Stockholm University. And outside of work, as I know myself, he's a sea kayaker, runner. I've been able to kayak next to him, a musician, a husband, and a father. So Markus, welcome Markus to this session today. So I wondered if you could speak about Stockholm Environment Institute itself and tell us about your work. And we'd be very interested to hear about your work in the Arctic as well, which has been a big part of the work you've been doing. And then maybe you can shed some light on some of the things that are happening at Stockholm Environment Institute on sustainable lifestyles and education. And amongst all of that, what is something exciting that you're working on right now that might still be in development or something you found has been very exciting for you in this work? And I know we've got some slides as well, so just let me know when you'd like to show some of those slides. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can say a couple of things. I spent, there's so many funny turns here, but I met my wife on a motorcycle trip in Spain. I shipped a motorcycle over and traveled with a friend for 3 months. She's Swedish, I'm American. We made a deal when she came over to visit initially, after we decided we were going to make it more permanent, that we would live in both countries. So one of the vows when we got married was we would live in both countries. And after a decade living in the South in the US, my turn came up. I said, really, do we need to do this? And we did, and it opened up the opportunity to do grad study. So I was at the sociology department for several years, and academia is really interesting. It's really it's challenging, lots of thoughtful people, but it often prides itself on this keeping a distance from activities in the real world. Not always, but often enough. And I felt like I wanted to take what I'd learned, especially the more abstract pattern recognition that we call theory, that I wanted to take that and apply it more directly in work. And I had contacts at Stockholm Environment Institute, who I'd worked with to do a report on the Obama administration's potential for changing the US's direction around climate change. And that led to me applying for a job at SEI and coming over where that social science knowledge was much more actively useful. And rather than aiming at trying to get people to read a journal article, that I could focus on trying to apply the science to the work. So I came over to SEI because it was mixing science and this kind of scientific insights that can be so important with policy and also practice. So trying to make those links between new insights, developing those into new institutional structures, guidelines, policies that help to support more positive activities and helping to change what we do, whether that's around businesses polluting or people dealing with each other in a more constructive way. So that was my entry to SEI, and I was working on climate change at the time. We had a project dealing with the Arctic called the Arctic Resilience Report. I was not familiar with the Arctic at the time, and the person who led the project had to leave the project, so there was sort of a gap there, and they needed a senior person who was sort of an all-purpose kind of person, a jack of all trades type of person who could step into it. And I thought about it for a while. I thought it seemed pretty interesting. It was a mix of countries that have a real impact and in a space on the planet that is changing faster than almost any other place. So I said yes to that. Spent 5 years working within that project, learning about resilience, learning about change in the Arctic, learning about indigenous communities and how they're trying to preserve their lifestyles, their ways of life that are anchored in ecosystems, but not using up those ecosystems at the same time. And that carried into a project on wetlands. Arctic wetlands. Turns out that 20% of Sweden's greenhouse gas emissions come from degraded wetland areas. I was shocked at how much of those emissions come from wetlands. And it's not just Sweden, it's other Nordic countries, it's other countries around the world. And I've often described that saying my training is in psychology and sociology. My view of wetlands was that it's a source of mosquitoes, wet boots, and when I was growing up, it was a place where monsters were found, right? Creature of from the Black Lagoon and large, long-toothed critters that you wouldn't want to encounter. And then it turns out that it's this huge, important type of ecosystem that houses biodiversity. It stores carbon like crazy, and it's really important for us for water resources as well. So I dove into that and have had the good fortune of securing some grant money to pursue that, and we have another year and are making recommendations to the Arctic Council that we hope will have a low implementation threshold, but potentially large consequences. And that's been quite exciting. Then I would say that something similar has happened with our sustainable lifestyles work. But the projects that I'm working on right now have to do with the steel industry in Sweden. The steel industry is making an enormous transition or transformation from producing steel with coal to producing it with hydrogen. And that process in itself is quite a remarkable process. Here in Sweden, we're analyzing this process to identify the factors that have contributed to making that transition possible. And certainly a shift that's not happened without a lot of struggle, but it is very promising, and it looks like the Swedish steel industry will lead in developing steel that has important valuable properties for sustainability that's also produced without having to use coal. This wetlands project is another, and now the sustainable lifestyles project. And I could wrap that a little bit just by saying there's a lot of discussion about wanting to make changes to save the planet. And what I like to refer to is the planet's fine without us. We don't need to worry about saving the planet. It's us we need to save. So that's where we need to engage in this lifestyles work, and looking for ways to find this magic match between finding activities that and ways of living that make us more satisfied, more happy with our lives, and at the same time have less negative environmental impact. And we know there are pathways for doing that. I also want to acknowledge there are many places in the world where people aren't getting enough. So we need to redistribute some and make sure that where people aren't getting enough food or don't have clean energy, those kinds of needs, that we can, there are enough resources to be able to raise the standard at the same time, and not have to lower the standard elsewhere, but to change that standard elsewhere, so that we can be more satisfied with our lives and not waste resources that don't need to be wasted. That was kind of a long description. There are a few slides here I can run through.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Some of what's exciting about,
Yeah.
About SEI is that there's so much going on. Yeah, so much going on in different areas, and it makes it an exciting place to work at all levels, both whether it's colleagues coming in with new ideas and a lot of energy, or folks like me who've been around for a while and want to pick our fights carefully, so that we can try to match our experience with the places where we think that'll have the most impact. But Vanessa, you've got the slides. I can point out just some of the basics here.
That sounds great. Yeah, thank you for taking us on that journey, also from climate change to the Arctic, to the work that you're doing in wetlands. And as you say, very exciting to get that funding to look into that in more detail, and the current work on steel. So yes, let's take a look at some of these slides of some of the work that's happening in SEI as well. So yes, if you can speak to those as well.
Yeah, like I say, there is a whole list of projects, and this is just a few. A lot of the work around cities. Actually, we're on different slides here. Let me take a step back. So this first one is looking for ways to essentially remove fossil fuels. One of the strategies is just to leave it in the ground. If we set up new infrastructure for extracting fossil fuels and refining them, then there's a lot of lock-in that takes place. So the most efficient and effective way to make that shift is, for starters, not to invest new resources in extraction and refinement, and help to identify pathways to shift off of fossil-free, or to shift off of fossil fuels, and at the same time maintain a societal structure that provides a good safety net for people and good strong infrastructure. Sweden is a good example of a country that's been able to raise its standard of living at the same time it has reduced its dependency on fossil fuels. That's an interesting story in itself, because it dates back to the energy crisis of the 70s. And it also includes some good fortune having fast moving water in the north that provides for hydropower, having lots of open areas that not without some difficulty provide areas that we can mount up wind power. But to do this mesh with eliminating fossil fuels in the energy system, especially at the same time that we maintain and build out a welfare state that provides for the things that the Nordic welfare states provide. So to the next slide. The Candies project is really about providing information feedback around sustainable food production and consumption. So shifting to plant-based food and providing, one of the really important things in these change processes is to know what kind of impact our personal choices is having, but to also understand how those personal choices fit in a larger context. And the Candies project is helping to develop some of these kinds of digital tools that will help us to identify the more incremental changes that we make ourselves and how those fit into the larger context and have actually an impact that is identifiable, measurable at a country or even a global level. To the next one, agri-FOSSI, agriculture for food security. This is very much around dealing with hunger and food security in the global south. I'm not as familiar with the details of this, but the SEI has a long history. It was actually founded on meshing environmental protection with development, and obviously an important part of development is ensuring that people have the food that they need to not only survive but to be healthy, to raise their kids without fear that food is running out. And a lot of the food production that's very effective is at a quite small scale, and also enables people to engage with their environment. It is interesting that people engaged in this small scale farming, they know where food comes from, whereas in the northern parts of the planet, our experience of the source of food is often limited to grocery store shelves. If we don't know where food comes from, it's a lot easier to be wasteful and careless with it. So the agri-FOSSI project is really about connecting those things, providing support so that people can deliver on their own food security and take control of it. Next slide, urban circularity assessment framework. Again, this is very much, SEI has done a lot of work around tools that provide some kinds of metrics that tell us how we're doing when we set goals, whether it's circularity or reduction in consumption of different kinds of resources, so that when we make those choices to shift what we're using or shift our activities, we have some sense of what kind of an impact that's having, both so that we have that encouragement to know that it has some impact, but also we can see how that is influencing the problem that we've been trying to tackle. I think we can just flash through these. The Vinci project, some testing of augmented reality for training, looking at low carbon tourism that takes a number of different forms. My own low carbon tourism has been things like taking a kayak, spending a week out in the archipelago, where I take the great thing about a kayak is that you can load it up with luxuries, food and wine or cognac, a little larger tent than you would carry on your back. You go out to an interesting place and you hang out with friends and spend that time enjoying a social experience, but with good food and drink in amazing sort of nature settings. And there are many of these kinds of things where instead of flying, you can take the train or engage in activities that are very social, very satisfying, but very low impact on environment. And supporting companies that help to facilitate that kind of tourism. There's a lot of work on the next slide, number 6, a lot of work around finance, because obviously channeling resource flows to invest in these kinds of things is really important to triggering and scaling up the kinds of activities. Cities are such a key core of activity. It's a level of governance where things are manageable, and it's the scale where we do what we do, where we carry out our professions and our jobs, where we consume what we consume. And it's really where the rubber hits the road, you could say. And so ensuring that there are financial streams going to cities is really a critical element of this transition to sustainability. The next one, number 7, is school food for change. And obviously our routines and habits and knowledge get set in place when we're children. I can tell you of my 2 kids, one of them followed my dietary habits, the other one hasn't. And my daughter, who decided to stop eating meat around age 6, she was asking, so is this, she grabbed a muscle in her arm and said, is this meat? And I said, well, yeah. And she said, okay, I'm not eating it anymore. And we haven't eaten meat at home since the kids were born. But it was that learning and understanding there's a difference, and you can make choices about those things, and you set habits in place. So schools are a really important place for not only for education, but for setting new patterns and consciousness about the impact that our food has. And then the last slide here is a selection of images, pictures of colleagues from around the world who are engaging in these kinds of projects, these kinds of activities, and facilitating this shift to lifestyles that are more satisfying, less impact, and can help lead the way, not only by increasing knowledge and helping people to change what they do, but by by being the change, I guess. So that's a quick tour through SEI's work. There's a lot more work out there. Some of it directly links to lifestyles. Some of it is more focused on other specific issues like climate change or waste management, those kinds of things that are also extremely important and a part of that bigger puzzle.
Great, thank you so much, Markus. And I know that last slide as well, there's a video being produced around different lifestyle actions, which I think, people talking about the kind of sustainable lifestyle actions in the way that you've also been sharing the examples, including your low tourism, high social, kayaking adventures in the archipelago. But great to see the range of actions, and it kind of gets to the point you've made about how sustainable lifestyles and education is both about our personal choices, our personal practices, and it's also in this larger context of schools and cities and finance, and how do we bring all those things together to really see the kind of untapped potential that we were talking about around using the shifts in lifestyles and behaviors to achieve living well for all within the means of the earth. So thanks for highlighting those, Markus. So, a number of people in the cohort and people watching this might be thinking about a lifestyles and education career, or kind of career generally, in the direction of the different initiatives you've been mentioning. So finally, what is one piece of advice you'd give for people who are just getting started and are interested in moving forward on these issues?
Yeah, well, I've learned not to give advice. What I could say is what's worked for me, yeah, well, I would say I would guess, without having met all of you in the cohort, that part of what has carried you into this work in the first place is a pretty strong measure of idealism and curiosity. And I guess first and foremost, I would say hold on to that idealism and curiosity and foster that. Don't let it go. keep on developing it, and you will find unexpected places where you can put that to work, and where you can work in ways that are really that you can get a lot of satisfaction out of, that lead you to the next opportunity that will sometimes be something that you plan and sometimes be completely unanticipated. So maintain that idealism, curiosity, stay flexible. And let me just add one last insight from sociology that I think is really important and valuable. A sociologist named Rogers Hollingsworth has done pretty extensive work around the individual characteristics and institutional conditions that have led to breakthrough discoveries in the biomedical sciences. But I think you can generalize more broadly. What Rogers has discovered is that the kind of people who are most likely to make the connections, to make these new breakthroughs, are people who've had training in a number of different areas and are able to not only put those together themselves, but also connect more effectively with others with different kinds of expertise. So it's about that curiosity and pursuing that together, because this world is way too complex for us to tackle alone. We need to do it with teamwork. And in order to have that effective teamwork, we need to really be curious about one another's knowledge and one another's experience and one another's work, and be able to dig into that to identify the spaces that are yet unexplored or insufficiently explored between our different types of expertise, because that's where the magic is. So develop that, be curious about each other's work, and find the people you really find exciting to work with, and and dig in and keep it up, because we all depend on it.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been the Sustainable Lifestyles and Education Leaders session and series. I'm Vanessa Timmer with One Earth, and this has been Markus Carson from the Stockholm Environment Institute. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Welcome everyone. This is a June session of the cohort for the SLE MAC on lifestyles. And today, myself, Laura Suillo, I am UNEP's Sustainable Lifestyles Outreach and Communication Specialist, and I'll be interviewing Denise Conselheiro from Brazil, from Akatu, in which she serves as Education Manager. Hello, Denise, how are you?
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here talking to you today. It's nice to get to know all of you.
Well, Akatu's work is more kind of defined towards the term sustainable consumption, but and then now would like you to talk about your work and Akatu's work, and how does it intertwine with sustainable lifestyles and education, and something that.
So Akatu is an institute, and its headquarters in São Paulo, here in Brazil, in the southeast area of Brazil. And it's an NGO, as I said. It has been founded in 2001. It has completed 21 years this year. And it works to mobilize the population towards social sustainability and practices through conscious consumption. So our main, or sustainable consumption. Our main goal is to engage our population into practicing conscious or sustainable consumption. I'd like to tell a little bit about how the name Akatu and what it means. So Akatu is a Tupi, that's indigenous language word, and A means seed or word, and Katu means good or better. So Akatu is translating it from O2P to English. It means that we want to be a good seed, for a better word, or we do want to help engaging good individuals for a better collective. So this is the idea behind the name of Akatu. And to describe what we understand as conscious consumption, for us, the term conscious consumption means that is the consumption with better impacts. So the idea is to work with a tool that help people understand their place or their role in this transition towards a more sustainable world, a more sustainable lifestyle. Our mission is to contribute to a faster transition towards sustainable lifestyles for the well-being of the society by means of sustainable consumption and production. So we do believe that sustainable consumption and production are the means to get to a well-being society with a sustainable lifestyle. So we do our work here at Akatu in three main perspectives. So the first one we do from the start, Akatu has been producing data and producing information on conscious consumption and the adoption of conscious consumption and sustainable lifestyle habits here in Brazil. So we have been creating methodologies, research, and studies to study how Brazilians to measure, to inform, and to gather data on how Brazilians' lifestyles is developing through the years. So we've done several publications and several research and studies, both quantitative and qualitative studies on the barriers and the triggers to behavior change in consumption. So this is a periodical study that Akatu produces every 2 or 3 years to evaluate and to monitor how Brazilians are including sustainable lifestyle habits or conscious consumption habits and practices to their everyday life. Based on these studies and in this work, we've developed a diagnosis tool that we call TCC in Portuguese, or CCT. It's a tool that we use in our everyday work to measure, to evaluate the level of consciousness. This is a horrible word for us to speak, for Brazilian speakers to pronounce, but the level of consciousness and consumption, and helping them to raise awareness of these individuals. So the idea that this is a tool that is available online. Everyone can access this tool. Of course, this is in Portuguese because it's focused on Brazilians, but this is a tool that we have, a website, a platform that helps people to identify how they're doing in terms of adopting conscious consumption in their everyday life. So you begin this evaluation form, and you answer a few questions, and you have the results developed and customized for your choices and your answers. And then you receive some tips and some recommendations in terms of evolving towards a more sustainable lifestyle. And this is a tool that we use on our everyday works as diagnosis to help us develop our projects and implement our activities, and to monitor and to follow up on the results of our awareness raising activities on our projects here at Akatu. The second line of work of Akatu is through communication. So we do have a strong work with communication strategies and projects focused on awareness raising of the public in general, of Brazilians and especially internet users here in Brazil in general. So we do develop a series of contents and tools to help sensitize Brazilians towards adopting a more sustainable lifestyle. So we do have apps, we do have games, we do have websites, we do have several other tools and strategies that we make available for Brazilian population for them to adopt more conscious consumption practices at home. We do have this tool that we use a lot, that we call it mobilizing tips. This is something that we do on a regular basis. That is basically an equivalence calculation that helps people to understand the impacts and to get to know the impacts of their consumption choices. So this is something that we use a lot in order to help Brazilians and to sensitize Brazilians into understanding that their personal choices makes a difference. So to help get over this idea that just one person changing their habits has no impact in terms of sustainable lifestyle. So this tool is it's very common and you use a lot on an everyday basis, works in communication. I brought one of this, we call this tips, but it's something like recommendations. I brought one of this materials to present to you. This is, it's very common here in Brazil that people waste their pizza edges. They get to eat the rest of the pizza, but they throw out the pizza edge. This is a huge waste. So because we eat lots of pizzas here in Brazil, it's an Italian root based population. So we do consume lots of pizzas. And we, in the sense, we have lots of waste in terms of pizza edges. So if half of the pizza edges that are thrown away here in Brazil, in half of this pizza edges thrown away, it's used to produce all of this edge is used to produce a volume of water that's enough to fill 18 Olympic pools. So if you say this in terms of the water, I don't know, 200,000 liters of water, no one gets to know how much is it, because it's such a huge number. It's something so out of everyone's realities that we don't get to understand the real impact of it. Oh, so 3,000 liters of water. It's something that we don't get in touch with in our everyday life, so we don't understand. But if I say that we're gonna waste 18 Olympic pools of water, it's something that you can relate to. You know, you have seen an Olympic pool, so you know how much of water we're talking about. So this is the idea behind our tips or recommendations that we produce on a regular basis about several issues and several themes that Akatu works is related to. This is another one focused on water. I brought two focused on water consumption, but of course we do have several ones on energy consumption, on waste production, on food. So you can check our website, or it's akatu.org.br, and you see lots of these recommendations and tips. This one talks about the reuse of water, and this is to give an idea of people of how much they waste water when they don't collect the water after the washing machine water cycle is over. So this tip states that if you collect 1 month worth of water from the washing machine after it's used, you have enough water to do 130 flushes on your toilet. So this is a huge amount of water that you can save if you just collect the water for 1 month after using the washing machine. So this whole idea behind our tips, our recommendations, that is a communication tool that we use a lot to sensitize Brazilians into adopting conscious consumption practices and habits in their everyday life. This is another example of our communication work. We work with several advertising agencies in order to produce campaigns that are focused on sustainability issues and not on publicity itself, not on sales and marketing directly. So we do have 2 campaigns that are current under execution. One is focused again on water. So this is focused on the several water restrictions that Brazil has gone through in the last years. This is a campaign that started in 2014, 2015. That says that Água Pede Água is the name of the campaign, but the idea is how much we gotta recognize the value of water and learn to consume it in a more rational and effective way. And the other campaign in the left is a campaign called Novo PF. We have, I don't think it's something that other countries have, but this is the idea of when you go to a restaurant and you order the ordinary menu, the regular menu, it's usual in Brazil to receive a really large plate, something that most of people aren't able to eat one meal. So the idea is to try to get the restaurants to participate, to support the idea, and to get the customers, the consumers to participate in order to have sizes of the plates of the dishes. So you can choose if you have a small, a medium, or a large plate. and the restaurant will offer you the same meal, the same food, but in a smaller or in a bigger size in order to fulfill your hungriness. So this is the idea behind it. You don't have one simple, one common plate that here in Brazil is very large and causes a lot of waste. So talking a little bit about the part that I'm responsible here at Akatu, I work with educational projects. Most of the educational projects are focused on youth, on children and adolescents. The main project in this area is Akatu, and Akatu is the project I've been leading for about 8 years now. It's a continuous project, and it's based on a web platform, on a learning network that we've been creating and developing through the years. The idea that this online platform is the support for a network that promotes several activities. We've been working, of course, mostly online over the past 2.5 years because of the pandemic restrictions. But the idea is that we do have a hybrid format that includes in-person activities, so activities in schools all over the country, in person, and online activities, especially with educators. We do have this platform focused on a specific cycle of the Brazilian basic education that is called the fundamental education here. It's from 1st to 9th grade, so kids from students from 6-7 years old to 14-15 years old. But this is the start of the process. This is the idea is to begin to work sustainable consumption and sustainable lifestyles from a very early age. So this is what we do today, but this is developing into working on both ends of the cycle. So we're starting to work with younger children and with older adolescents, with youth, to promote the sustainable lifestyles. The idea is that the website or the platform makes available, offers several methodologies and contents for the educators and teachers to work this sustainable, to promote learning about sustainability issues and to help them to build together with their students practical projects to get all this knowledge to work. So the idea is to do something that's both in person and online, but also that mixes learning methodologies with practical approach. So these are the major differentials of Akatu, and it's what I believe that's been doing it work so well through last years, so through all these years. The idea that the platform, especially and the contents directed to the students, have to be not only very much interactive, because it's something that's really attractive to these kids, to these students, and also has to bring the logic, to bring the fun to sustainability learning. So the idea is that you gotta make it, and through our web platform, we're able to implement it. You gotta make it learning and practicing sustainability fun and attractive to these young students. Here I have some examples and some photos of this work. I brought a few that are from 2016. We've done several work with several sustainability issues, but these are examples. For instance, we did in 2016 a work about preventive health with several kids all around the country. We developed a game called Germ Combats it's really fun, and use it promoting marathons all over the country to help people understand the importance of washing hands, and how to do it in practice. This is a game that through the last 2.5 years has been disseminating itself around the country because it's a very useful tool to learn about preventive health. And in 2016, we also did a very strong work here in the state that we are located here in São Paulo, talking about the use of electric energy. So the consumption of electric energy and how to do it in a more conscious way was the theme of a project that we developed through 2016 here in São Paulo. This is another example of how we make this work, mixing in-person strategies with online technology and support. This is the numbers of Akatu nowadays. So this actually is from December to 2021, but this gives you one idea. This is Brazil. So we have people participating at Akatu from different regions of Brazil, from north, from south, from northeast. We have several schools from different cities, from different sites, from different locations. So we have rural schools, we have urban schools, we have huge schools, we have small schools, we have indigenous schools. So all of these different characteristics are present in the participants of the platform today. We have about 70,000 people working with us or registered to the platform. Most of them are students, but we do also have a very large number of teachers participating in the platform. What is very important for us to work as a team and to make this combination of teachers and students doing the learning process and in practicing sustainability on their pedagogical practice every day. And now to finish, something new, something exciting that I'm working right now that is new for us. As I said, we are developing, Akatu is the starting point, but we are developing education activities through the other parts of the cycles of our basic education. So this is a project that we are developing right now with older kids. Sorry, I don't know why it came back. So I'm going to leave it here. So this is a project that we are developing with older kids, with high school students. This is called Olympic Climates or Climate Olympics. The idea is that we have activities focused on climate crisis, and these students are forming teams to have a healthy competition between them and to stimulate them to develop solutions, both on reduction the emission of greenhouse gases, also in terms of mitigating the impacts of climate crisis. So it's a healthy competition because it's Olympics. The ones with the better solutions will be awarded, but the idea is to stimulate all over the country the production and the creation of these solutions by the students, by high school students here in Brazil. We're starting this with a pilot project that is focused in São Paulo, that is the city we're based on, but this is a much bigger project. This is the first step of the project. We are right now co-creating the strategies and the methodologies for the project with educators from São Paulo. But the idea is that in the next step of this project, over the next months and next years, we'll be able to expand it and to make it national. So take this idea and this Olympics to schools all over the country. It's very exciting because this is the time to talk about climate crisis and everyone is very eager to hear about it. And this is the project that we are building with students, with educators to help respond to this demand. I'm really glad to present a little bit about Akatu's work for you. And thank you so much for listening.
No, thank you, Denise. And now running back to the presentation, I wanted to ask you a little bit, the students, the cohort is trying right now to prepare a summit for September. So I wanted to ask you, since you've been so successful in escalating ideas and also reaching out to important partners, like how do you do that? And what would you recommend to come up and kind of amplify the messages and the ideas that you have as an organization?
Yeah, the idea here behind the scale-up process is that you have to have something that can be customized to different realities. You can get there with a formula that is completely ready. If you have something that can be, the methodology is one, and it's behind everything we do, but we gotta be able to customize certain aspects of the project in order to better fulfill the needs of different institutions. So when you get to school in São Paulo, they have some needs. When you get to school in the Northeast area, they have other needs. When you get to school that is an indigenous school, they have other needs. So you gotta have the core of the project that is be able to adjust it and to customize it to each and every reality that we're going to face during the project implementation.
Yeah, and how have you worked with different stakeholders, and what criteria do you have to reach out to specific organizations? For example, I see you work with Unilever, Nestle, like very big companies. What kind of criteria?
Yeah, we do have different kind of stakeholders in this project specifically. So we have the financial supporters. That's the case of Unilever. Unilever has been one of the financial supporters of the project, and it's not the only one. We have several companies supporting the project activities, and we do have the stakeholders that are directly involved with the pedagogical part of the project. So we do work directly with education secretariats all over the country. So public institutions and municipalities and state secretariats are directly involved in implementation of the projects, this project specifically, and they are very strategic partners, especially in the part of implementation. So the companies are part of the project mostly as financial support, for providing financial support for the project, and the educational authorities are part of the implementation of the pedagogical part, especially.
Okay, so before we leave the floor to everyone else, I wanted to ask you if you have a piece of advice for anyone wanting to work in this sector in the future.
Yeah, when I saw this question, I was thinking about how could I be very positive in terms of education, especially considering the effects of this last years in educational area. I think this is a very challenging moment to work with education. Education for sustainable lifestyle is part of it, and we're going to face. We've had several steps back because of the whole pandemic question and restrictions, but I also think this is an opportunity. So we have been forced to work in different parameters with education over the last years, especially the last 2.5 years. And this is a huge opportunity for us to work in a different way in terms of educate people to have a more sustainable lifestyle. So be resilient and try to remember that it's important to innovate and to take this opportunity that is being brought by this crisis and to developing new ideas and implementing new methods. So be really resilient and take the opportunity that this challenge, this difficult time is bringing us.
And thank you so much, Denise.